In the winter of 1917, the Russian Empire stretched across nearly one-sixth of the Earth's landmass, a vast and formidable realm that had survived revolutions, invasions, and centuries of political upheaval. Yet beneath the glittering surface of imperial pageantry and royal ritual, the foundations of that empire had been slowly weakening for decades. At its center stood the Romanov Dynasty, a royal house that had ruled Russia for more than 300 years, presiding over an empire defined as much by grandeur and power as by profound inequality and mounting unrest. Their story was not simply one of monarchy, but of a civilization built upon ceremony, tradition, and autocratic authority, and its ultimate collapse would culminate in one of the most haunting nights in modern history. The Romanov dynasty began in 1613, when the young nobleman Michael I of Russia was elected Tsar by a national assembly following the chaos of Russia's time of troubles. His ascension marked the beginning of a family line that would transform Russia from a fractured medieval state into a sprawling imperial power. Over the following centuries, Romanov rulers shaped Russia through conquest, reform, and monumental architectural ambition. Palaces rose along the banks of the Neva River, cathedrals glittered with gold leaf and icons, and cities like St. Petersburg emerged as symbols of imperial aspiration. Each palace, each boulevard, and each ceremonial hall reflected a political philosophy deeply rooted in the belief that the Tsar ruled not merely by law, but by divine mandate. Among the most influential figures of this dynasty was Peter the Great, whose reign at the turn of the 18th century reoriented Russia toward Europe. Determined to modernize his nation, Peter constructed a new capital from marshland along the Baltic Sea, a city that would serve both as a strategic port and as a symbolic gateway between Russia and the West. The result was St. Petersburg, a city of canals and neoclassical facades, whose architecture echoed the grandeur of Amsterdam, Venice, and Paris. The city itself became a monument to imperial willpower. Stone palaces lined the riverbanks, their massive colonnades designed not only to impress foreign dignitaries, but to communicate a deeper message: Russia had entered the ranks of Europe's great powers. Successive Romanov rulers expanded this imperial vision. Under Catherine the Great, the empire reached new heights of cultural prestige and territorial expansion. Catherine cultivated the arts, corresponded with Enlightenment philosophers, and oversaw the construction of palaces whose ornate interiors rivaled the courts of Versailles. Yet behind this cultural flowering lay a rigid social structure. The Russian aristocracy flourished, enjoying immense estates and privileges, while millions of peasants lived under the harsh realities of serfdom. This imbalance, an empire of extraordinary wealth resting upon a vast population of impoverished laborers, would shape the tensions that eventually threatened Romanov rule. By the 19th century, Russia's imperial landscape was defined by a network of palaces that symbolized the dynasty's authority. The most famous of these was the Winter Palace, an immense green and white Baroque structure dominating Palace Square in St. Petersburg. The palace served not only as the Tsar's residence, but also as the ceremonial heart of the empire. Within its halls, gilded staircases spiraled beneath painted ceilings, and enormous ballrooms glowed beneath chandeliers of crystal and gold. These spaces were designed with deliberate theatricality. Each archway and marble column reinforced the idea that the Romanovs stood at the center of an unshakable imperial order. Yet the architecture of power often concealed the fragility beneath it. While imperial palaces projected stability and control, Russia itself was entering a period of profound transformation. Industrialization had begun to reshape the country's economy, drawing millions of peasants from rural villages into rapidly expanding cities. Factories rose along riverbanks, railway lines stretched across thousands of kilometers of wilderness, and a new urban working class emerged. These changes brought opportunity for some, but they also introduced new forms of hardship and inequality. Crowded tenements, low wages, and long working hours fueled growing resentment toward the aristocratic elite who seemed insulated from such struggles. Throughout the 19th century, waves of unrest periodically shook the empire. Revolutionary groups began to emerge, inspired by socialist and anarchist ideas circulating across Europe. These movements were small at first, often operating in secrecy, distributing pamphlets and organizing clandestine meetings. But their influence steadily grew, especially among intellectuals and students who believed that Russia's autocratic system was incompatible with modern society. One of the most dramatic expressions of this revolutionary fervor occurred in 1881 when Alexander II of Russia was assassinated by members of a radical organization known as the People's Will. The emperor had ironically been known as a reformer, having abolished serfdom in 1861 in an effort to modernize the empire. Yet his reforms were seen by some as insufficient and by others as dangerously destabilizing. The explosion that killed him on a snowy street in St. Petersburg reverberated across the empire, convincing many within the Romanov court that reform only encouraged further rebellion. The reaction was swift and severe. Alexander's successor, Alexander III of Russia, adopted a policy of rigid conservatism. Political dissent was suppressed, censorship intensified, and the secret police expanded their surveillance of suspected revolutionaries. The state promoted a doctrine known as orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, emphasizing loyalty to the Tsar, devotion to the Russian Orthodox Church, and pride in Russian cultural identity. For a time, this approach appeared to restore stability. Yet beneath the surface, the forces of change continued to gather momentum. When Alexander III died in 1994, the throne passed to his son, Nicholas II of Russia. Nicholas was only 26 years old, and his ascension marked the final chapter in the Romanov Dynasty's long history. Shy and deeply religious, Nicholas believed sincerely in the divine right of kings. He viewed autocracy not merely as a political system, but as a sacred duty entrusted to him by God. Yet this conviction, while sincere, left him poorly prepared to navigate the turbulent forces reshaping the Russian Empire at the dawn of the 20th century. Nicholas's reign began with an event that foreshadowed the tensions to come. During the celebrations for his coronation in Moscow in 1896, a massive crowd gathered at Hodinka Field to receive commemorative gifts distributed by the government. Rumors spread that supplies were running out, and the crowd surged forward in panic. In the chaos that followed, more than 1,000 people were crushed to death. The tragedy shocked the nation and cast an early shadow over Nicholas's rule. Although the tragedy was accidental, many Russians interpreted it as a symbol of the widening gap between the imperial court and the ordinary people it governed. At the same time, Nicholas's personal life seemed to embody the romance and pageantry associated with royal dynasties. He married Alexandra Feodorovna, a German-born princess whose deep religious devotion would profoundly influence the imperial family's private world. Together, they established their primary residence at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskaya Selo, just outside St. Petersburg. Unlike the grand ceremonial spaces of the Winter Palace, the Alexander Palace offered a more intimate environment, reflecting Nicholas and Alexandra's preference for family life over courtly spectacle. Within these quieter halls, the Romanov family appeared almost ordinary. Nicholas and Alexandra raised 5 children, 4 daughters and a long-awaited son, Alexei Nikolaevich.
Photographs from the period often show the children playing in gardens or posing with their parents in modest naval uniforms and simple white dresses. Yet behind this image of domestic harmony lay a secret that would profoundly shape the dynasty's fate. The young heir, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a genetic disorder that prevented his blood from clotting properly. Even minor injuries could lead to life-threatening bleeding. Desperate to protect their son, Nicholas and Alexandra sought help wherever they could find it. Their search eventually brought them into contact with a wandering mystic named Grigori Rasputin. Rasputin's presence within the imperial court would soon ignite controversy and suspicion across Russia, feeding rumors that the Romanovs had fallen under the influence of a dangerous charlatan.
At the dawn of the 20th century, the Romanov dynasty still appeared outwardly secure. Palaces glittered beneath winter snow, imperial guards marched across vast ceremonial squares, and the empire's borders stretched across continents. Yet beneath the surface, political tensions, social inequality, and personal tragedies were quietly converging. Within 2 decades, these forces would bring the Romanov dynasty to a catastrophic end, an end that would unfold in secrecy, violence, and one of the most chilling nights in modern history. The empire was approaching its breaking point.